Passenger pigeons once filled the skies of North America in numbers almost impossible to picture. There may have been 3 to 5 billion of them. Witnesses described flocks that blocked the sun and kept passing overhead for hours. And yet, by the beginning of the 20th century, almost every one of those birds was gone. 14 years later, the last known passenger pigeon died in captivity. So how does one of the most abundant birds on Earth disappear in little more than a century? The easy answer is hunting, but that answer leaves out the machinery that turned hunting into an industry, the destruction of the forests the birds depended on, and a public that simply could not believe such an abundant animal could ever run out. This was not some ancient extinction reconstructed from fossils. It happened in modern America, while newspapers, railways, and growing cities were transforming the continent. People watched the decline happen. Most just did not understand what they were seeing. To understand the extinction, we first need to understand the scale. Passenger pigeons lived across eastern and central North America, from southern Canada through large parts of the United States. They were fast, streamlined birds, slightly larger and longer-tailed than many familiar pigeons, but the species was defined less by the individual bird than by the flock. They travelled in enormous groups, following changing supplies of acorns, beech nuts, and other forest foods. Their nesting colonies could spread across miles of woodland and contain millions of birds. One flight observed near Toronto in 1860 may have contained more than 1 billion. Some historical accounts were probably exaggerated. Even so, there were enough consistent reports from different places and different observers to leave little doubt that these flocks were extraordinary. People described a sound like distant thunder. They described droppings falling like rain. They described the sky changing colour as the birds passed overhead. The crime scene was not one nesting ground or one state. It stretched across a large part of the continent, and because the birds seemed to be everywhere, people assumed they always would be. Passenger pigeons did not simply gather in large flocks by chance. Their whole survival strategy depended on numbers. When a forest produced a heavy crop of nuts, a huge flock could arrive, feed quickly, and then move on. That mobility allowed the birds to exploit food supplies spread across an enormous range. Large colonies also offered protection. Hawks, foxes, and other predators could kill some birds, but they could not seriously damage a colony containing millions. The strategy worked brilliantly against natural predators. Then humans began attacking the birds in a completely different way. The passenger pigeon survived by gathering in overwhelming numbers, but once hunters could locate those gatherings, the same behaviour placed thousands of birds within easy reach. What had protected the species now made it vulnerable. Passenger pigeons had been hunted for generations. Indigenous communities harvested them, and European settlers also used them for food. That alone did not destroy the species. The turning point came when hunting stopped being mainly local and became commercial. In the 19th century, American cities grew quickly. Cheap meat was in demand, and passenger pigeons could be killed in huge numbers. Professional hunters began following the flocks from one nesting area to the next. Birds were shot from trees, caught in nets, and sometimes driven from their roosts with smoke. Adults were killed, young birds were taken from nests. Whole colonies became production sites. The objective was no longer to collect enough food for nearby families. It was to remove as many birds as possible and send them wherever buyers were waiting. But the hunters did not operate alone. Dealers purchased the birds. Railway companies transported them. Restaurants and city markets sold them. Customers created the demand, and governments mostly stood aside. This was not the work of one reckless man with a shotgun. It was a profitable system. Earlier hunters faced one major obstacle. They had to find the birds. Passenger pigeons moved constantly. A major flock might appear in one region, disappear, and then form a nesting colony hundreds of miles away. The Telegraph changed that. Once a large gathering was discovered, news could travel quickly. Hunters no longer had to rely on luck or local rumours. They could receive information, board a train, and head directly to the colony. Railways then carried the dead birds to distant cities. The result was a highly efficient chain. Find the flock, send the hunters, kill the birds, ship the meat, sell it far from the place where the killing occurred. During the Great Michigan Nesting of 1878, enormous numbers were killed and shipped away. Records from events like this are incomplete, but surviving estimates describe slaughter on a scale that local communities could never have sustained by themselves. Technology did not invent the hunt. It removed the limits that had once kept it local. So why did people keep killing them? Because the decline was difficult to recognise. When only a few animals remain, extinction feels real. When millions are still flying overhead, it feels ridiculous. That was the trap. A hunter could kill hundreds and still see thousands in the trees. A town could ship barrels of dead pigeons and hear reports of another colony somewhere else. Every loss looked small compared with what remained. Warnings did appear. Some people noticed that the flocks were shrinking. Others saw nesting colonies disappear from places where they had once been common. Protective laws were proposed and in some areas eventually passed. But enforcement was weak, and many of the measures arrived too late. There was no single moment when everyone realised the species was collapsing. The great flocks simply became less common, then rare, then absent. By the time the danger looked obvious, the population had already fallen apart. Hunting was not happening in an untouched landscape. At the same time, eastern North America was losing huge areas of forest. Trees were cleared for farms, towns, timber, and fuel. That mattered because passenger pigeons depended on large forest systems capable of producing enormous crops of nuts. It also made the remaining large colonies even more important, and therefore even more attractive to hunters. Hunting and deforestation worked together. One reduced the population directly, the other weakened the environment supporting it. Some researchers have also suggested that passenger pigeons needed very large groups to breed successfully. Once the population fell below a certain level, the remaining birds may have struggled to form stable colonies or reproduce fast enough to recover. That possibility is important, but it remains debated. The biology of the species may have accelerated the final collapse, but it did not start it. Humans pushed the passenger pigeon into a population range it had never evolved to survive. By the late 19th century, the great flocks were gone. Professional hunters kept searching, but there were fewer colonies left to find. Small groups were still reported, yet none developed into a meaningful recovery. The last widely accepted wild passenger pigeon was killed in Ohio in 1900. A few remained in captivity. Zoos attempted to breed them, but the numbers were too small and the efforts failed. Eventually, only one bird remained. Her name was Martha. She lived at Cincinnati Zoo. Visitors could stand in front of her enclosure and look at the final known member of a species that had once crowded the sky. There was no hidden flock waiting in some remote forest, no mate, no second chance. On 1st September 1914, Martha died. Her body was frozen and sent to the Smithsonian. A species once counted in the billions had ended with one bird in one cage. Before the verdict, Give the video a like if you enjoy seeing wildlife history investigated properly instead of squeezed into one easy explanation. It helps more wild ones find the case. Now, let us close the file. Did passenger pigeons really number in the billions? Yes. Historical accounts and modern estimates strongly support a population measured in billions. Was commercial hunting the main killer? Yes. Professional hunters destroyed major nesting colonies, while telegraphs, railways, and city markets allowed the killing to continue on a scale that had never been possible before. Did habitat loss also contribute? Absolutely. Deforestation removed food supplies and nesting habitat while the population was already under enormous pressure. And did the passenger pigeon simply fail because it could not adapt? No. Its dependence on large flocks may have made recovery more difficult once its numbers collapsed. But that does not let humans off the hook. Passenger pigeons did not vanish because they were badly designed. They vanished because people killed them faster than they could recover and destroyed much of the forest system they depended on. So the final verdict is clear. This was a human-caused extinction. The passenger pigeon was not lost because nobody could see it. It was lost because people saw so many that they could not imagine seeing none. And that may be the most dangerous lesson in the entire case. An animal does not have to look rare to be in trouble. By the time it does, the real damage may already have been done. The passenger pigeon is gone, but scientists are now trying to create a gene-edited bird that could resemble it and perhaps restore part of its ecological role. Would that count as bringing the species back, or only creating a convincing substitute? That case is on screen now.